Hello, everybody. My name is Aaron Canola, and welcome back once again to the Movie Battleground. Hope everybody is doing well. Hope you guys enjoyed the number one contenders match that went up last weekend. I won't quite spoil it for you yet, but if you haven't checked it out, please go check it out and see who will be the next person to take on the champion of Movie Battleground. But with that said, today is all about taking some other players and building up their record. We have Tyler Burch versus Will Cohen. Now, Will did not play all that long ago, and that is because he's actually a sub-in player. Originally, we were supposed to have Alec Miller with us today. Unfortunately, technological issues on his end made competing virtually impossible. It is a virtual show, and you have to have a working computer to compete. It's one of the few ramifications. I don't even make you watch the movies, but you have to be able to be on a computer. So unfortunately, he cannot be with us today. We do look forward to having him back in the near future. So Will, who is 1-1 after a very close loss to Alan, is stepping in to take that slot, and he's going up against Tyler Burch, who has had a bit of a unfortunate history in terms of Movie Battleground, in terms of just the unfortunate way that matches have worked out. After making a very impressive debut against JD Domash, his second match against Evan DeGraff, just again because of personal things on Evan's end, didn't quite work out. He was advanced on into the tournament anyways. He took on Medee Raymond, who would go on to become a finalist in the tournament. So unfortunately, that didn't work out for Tyler. And now we had this match with Alec that got set up. It got delayed again because of issues on the other end, but now he is here to play Will. And tonight will be a real test of Tyler, because is he going to take his frustrations with my show out on Will? I guess we will find out soon. But let's not waste any more time. Let's bring in the competitors and get to it. Introducing first, with a record of 1 win, 1 defeat, he is the Virtuoso, Will Cohen. Will, welcome back to the Battleground, sir. How are we doing today?
I am doing well. It is always an interesting position to be in, where you're all of a sudden told, "Hey, there's a match if you want it," and because um, I'm a glutton for punishment, I'm here.
We
So
accept gluttons for punishment. It's kind of our thing. Every match has a winner and a loser. So inevitably 50% of our player base is going to experience that. But yeah, well, obviously, I mean, it was a very, very close match against Alan. I mean, it went to the blind round, which apparently he's developed a proficiency for, because it was his second time having to play it and he won it.
yeah,
But you're back. You have something that a lot of players don't get, which is the opportunity to rebound quickly, just based on the fact that you have the record you have and you weren't already booked into a match, unlike a number of our other competitors, just based on the way that the scheduling broke down. So you have a
right.
chance at a quicker rebound. Do you think that'll help you, hurt you, or really have no impact?
It. I really don't know how to answer that question, because uh, in some regards, I do feel like I am still licking my wounds a lot, so I feel like I have something to prove, which can be dangerous if you get too determined and cocky. But when I saw these questions, my confidence level did rise, because I am far more confident in these questions, especially my answers in them, than I was in my match against Alan. So because of that, I feel that I I feel like I could do well tonight. Let's just put it that way.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and send you behind the scenes and bring in your opponent. Also coming in with a record of 1 win and 1 defeat, he is Tyler Burch. Tyler, welcome back, sir. It is a pleasure to have you back after an unfortunate loss the last time around. But hey, at least you can say that, it wasn't a fluke. He did go on to do pretty well in that tournament. But how are you feeling tonight making a comeback?
I'm feeling good. Excited to get back in here and get another chance. Especially, feeling more confident about my answers than last time, and being able to defend them. So I'm excited to get back into it.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I have said openly that I really respect about you as a competitor, but you have also said yourself that you think is what hurts you, is a very different mindset in terms of how you answer the questions, including with some questions, a particular specificity or level of personal connection to the answers that were given that you think may have hurt you. Is that something that you took into account when answering the questions today, or is it going straight for what you thought was the obvious, or a bit of a mix on the two?
Kind of a mix. I definitely tried to take a second and really think about my answers just to make sure, like, finding the difference between like, oh, am I just doing this because it's a quick reaction, or am I doing this because there's actual meaning behind it? But luckily, I found out that like after I thought about it, that my answers didn't really change that much. So it turns out that there was a lot more to it. I just didn't really take the time to think about. But once I did, I realized that these were the answers I wanted to go with, and these are the answers that I thought were the best answers to the question.
All right. Well, looking forward to seeing what you have there. I'll go ahead and bring Will back in. Gentlemen, let's go ahead and get started. Movie Battleground is a game that is a best of 5 rounds. It is the first to 3 points wins. Each round is worth 1 point. If one of our competitors does happen to get 3 points in a row, that will be a victory by knockout. On the other side, if it is a 2-2 tie after 4 rounds, we do have a 5th round. It is called the blind round. We'll talk about it if we need to. With that said, the way that the debate questions will work is you guys were given 4 questions ahead of time. You've had as much time as we can give you to prep for them. The way it'll work in game is you will each get a 60-second opening argument that will be followed by 2 minutes to expand and explain your arguments. Then you'll have a 4-minute open debate in which you can go back and forth, trade barbs, and get as many points as humanly possible, at which point you will then get 60 seconds to close out and wrap up your argument. At the end of all of that, I do have 2 great judges backstage with me in the form of John Marr and Noah McCausland. They will come on screen and give their deliberations in terms of who they believe won the argument. Should they not agree, I will also be taking notes and judging the match and will serve as the tiebreaker if necessary. With that said, though, do you guys have any questions, or are we ready to go?
I think we're ready. Well, I'm ready.
All right.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Let's do this.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get into it. And bringing up our first question, tomorrow, Friday the 13th, we get something that is worthy of a Friday the 13th, and that is a Rebel Wilson movie. On Netflix, the film Senior Year is releasing, in which Rebel Wilson stands the weight that made her famous now, plays a woman who suffered a coma, I believe, for 30 years. Which she went into when she was a high school senior, and now as a 40-year-old woman, she attempts to go back to high school and reclaim her senior year, and that sounds about as creepy as anything. No 40-year-old person should be allowed near a school unless you've already earned a teaching degree. Let's just be straight up about that. But it does lead us to an interesting thing, which is Netflix. Netflix over the years has grown more and more in developing, creating, and distributing their own films. As more and more companies start their own streaming services, Netflix has lost a lot of the IP it previously had and has had to rely on the development of its own products in order to succeed. And I think it's an interesting examination, as especially with the pandemic happening over the last couple of years and streaming becoming a more and more prominent way to release films, that we discuss the origins of where that came from. And so the question is, what is the best original Netflix film that was released in either 2015, 16, or 17? Now, the reason I gave them 3-year window is because in about those 3 years, the same amount of films were released as Netflix has put out yearly every year since then. So it's a fair list of films for them to pick from. Some definitely good ones early on from Netflix. Mostly shit, I'd imagine. I don't know. I haven't seen the most, but there's some good stuff.
A lot of Adam Sandler.
That Adam Sandler deal. So let's go ahead and get into it. So coming into this, Tyler, you were deemed the favorite of the two. So you got to choose which questions you go first on. You picked to go first on 2 and 4, which means, Will, you'll be going first on 1 and 3. So as I go ahead and bring your timer into the match, it will continue ticking once you begin speaking. The time will start when you do.
So when talking about Netflix, you can't really talk about Netflix, specifically Netflix movies, without talking about the fact that if it wasn't for Netflix, a lot of the streaming movies wouldn't have the legitimacy, or at the very least, wouldn't have been in the discussion. They were the forerunners on it, and they started very, very early on, just knocking films out of the park. So the film that I chose as the best one during this is the film that really, really put streaming films in the spotlight and put them in the talk of how legitimate they really are, and that's Beasts of No Nation. Beast of No Nation is a powerful, powerful tale from start to finish about about a relevant topic that's still going on right now with the war-torn African countries and boy soldiers. It is just gripping, action-packed, dramatic, and often funny. It is wonderful.
And time. All right, Tyler, over to you. Time starts when you begin speaking.
Over the years, Netflix has had a bunch of movies. I mean, like Aaron said, there's so many different movies. When I looked through the list of 15 through 17, there weren't a lot of good ones. But one stood out to me. It stood out to me ever since I watched it. It stayed with me, and it really did a lot more than I'll ever realize it did. And that's the movie Gerald's Game, directed by Mike Flanagan. And that movie launched a career. That movie created a fantastic partnership between Mike Flanagan and Netflix. He was able to do something with one small room over 2 hours. That was probably one of the most tense movies I had ever seen. It showed that he was already becoming a master at his craft. I mean, the performance he was able to get out of Carla Gugino, the sheer terror, the wins, everything about that movie was excellently done, and is probably one of the ones that stands out the most to me in those early years of Netflix.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the 2-minute expansion. Will, time starts when you begin speaking.
With Beast of No Nation, this film is consistent all the way through. When it's not building, it's exploring. It's exploring the psychology of what happens when a child loses his parents, gets recruited and brainwashed into being a boy soldier, and everything that happens in the trials and tribulations of that. Now, with Gerald's Game, my big problem with this is that it tries often to do things that are almost completely unnecessary. While it's very intense, where in the scenes where she's having the conversations in her mind with herself and her dead husband, there's just all these external things that just keep happening that are just extraneous, to say the least. There's a dog that doesn't need to be there. The situation's already tense, but they have it in there anyways. There's this ghoulish figure that you don't see, who turns out to be not a figment of her imagination, but it turns out to be a real figure. What was the point of that? She's already going through enough, being tied to a bed, having all these flashbacks of her childhood and dealing with all of these things. Why add those extra things when they're not really adding anything to there? It's just there. And so, while it is a 2-hour movie, it easily could have been a very svelte 90 minutes, and it would have been a much better film because it would have been tight and to the point. While Beast of No Nation is a little over 2 hours long, it's 2 hours 15 minutes. In the hands of a worse director, it would have been much longer. But no, they tightened everything and still kept all of the emotion, all of the action, and you have great performances from actors like Idris Elba in there, who was just starting to get his footing in the movie scene as well. And this movie is just exactly why streaming movies are legitimate to stay.
All right, we'll go back over to Tyler for his 2 minutes. It starts when you begin speaking.
The themes of Gerald's Game, I think, are themes that we've all felt at some point in our lives. Vulnerability. That's really what this movie's about, is being vulnerable. For her, it's more of a physical thing. I mean, she went to this cabin to try to save her marriage. She did all these things that her husband wanted, because not because he wanted them, but because she was trying to be someone that he could love. Her trauma, everything. I mean, the door being open, like it's a literal manifestation of vulnerability. Her being chained to this bed while the door is open to the cottage, the dog coming in. I mean, all of this are situations that we've always feared being in, either physically or emotionally, and we get all of that throughout that movie. Honestly, that movie has never felt too long for me, or extraneous. Everything there. I mean, it had a purpose. The man that she thought was a ghoul the whole time, or that was a man, like a manifestation the whole time. He was there so that way she had something that went bump in the night, something that genuinely scared her, something that she had to conquer, um, something that weirdly enough we find out isn't really her enemy. It turns out it's really her cheerleader. I remember when she finally escaped and she was able to escape the handcuffs and get out, and she acknowledges him and leaves, and then later on, uh, when he sees her again, and it turns out that he was real. That moment where he's like, "I see you, I see you." That moment was really powerful because in a way, he was the first person that really saw her after she realized that she needed to be her own person, that she needed to overcome her vulnerabilities and stop trying to be someone for everybody else and to be the person that she wants to be. And so I think that it was a great job having him be there and saying I see you, because we all saw her after that.
And time. All right, we're going to go on to the 4-minute open discussion. The timer will start when the first person speaks.
So I find it really interesting that you say that she can finally be someone for herself and not for somebody else. Then if that's the case, then why is that guy there? Then why is his validation even relevant? Because if she's trying to finally be someone for herself, then why does that person need to be there at all?
I mean, we're not stuck on. I mean, we're not people on an island. We need people to realize that we've won the game. I mean, the movie's called Gerald's Game. It's not even called, Gerald's not even really in the. I mean, he dies in the movie pretty early on, and it's still called his game because she's still playing his game that whole time. She's winning. She won the game, and this man, this creature, he's the first person to acknowledge that she won, that she got through this crucible.
And that's I disagree. You see right there, I disagree with that. The first person that she really told was herself, and that is the more important thing. So once again, what is that guy's purpose to be there? So that's my one point. So that's one point that really, really took me out of that. I would have much rather, it would have just been a much better film had it really just been a part of her imagination and just all the sounds and the tricks of just being alone and trapped and vulnerable. That would have been that. You already had the horror there. You didn't need a figurehead for that. And then also on top of that, you have a dog who's not even following his own rules. It's like he ate the body that was on, he partially ate the body that was on the ground and was waiting for her to be vulnerable enough for her to, for him to eat her. Well, when she gets out, she's bleeding down the arm. And if he's already tasted human flesh and he already tasted human blood, he would want that. Then why isn't he going for it? That part just doesn't make sense. So again, you have this dog, you have this human that aren't following the rule set of the movie and aren't furthering the actual plot. They're not furthering the plot. They're not, they're not really they're not really that important when all is said and done. What's important is her conquering her fears, her conquering herself, and that's why the film could have easily been 90 minutes long and perfect. Where, let's take my movie. Let's take Beasts of No Nation. Beasts of No Nation is also something that's relevant. Even after all this time, they're still boy soldiers. They're still, these war torn countries with all of these people and all these kids getting sold, either sold or recruited into the servitude and being brainwashed, and what it's like for them to finally get out of that servitude. That is intense. That is emotional. and it just absolutely hits you like a brick when you see it, and it's just so marvelously done on top of it.
Right. Right. But I mean, just to get back to what we were talking about with Gerald's game. Sorry, I don't know how much time we have left. But yeah, no. Okay, cool. But yeah, so we'll talk about Beast of No Nation for a little while. Because I mean, I understand that this movie was impactful for a while. I don't know very many people who really this movie stuck with them for a very long time. I don't know if this movie resonated with you like that. I just know with Gerald's game, it resonated with me. Vulnerability. I mean, trying to conquer trying to win the games of others, and that feeling of finally being able to walk away and say that you don't have to. I mean, that's always been something that's always resonated with me, and that's why this movie's resonated with me.
Time. All right, we have 1 minute left on the clock for both competitors. Will, you're up first. Time starts when you begin speaking.
So when it comes to playing games, really, Beast of No Nation and Gerald's game kind of share one thing in common. It's about two people who are who are thrust into a situation and have to work their way out. Where Gerald's game loses that impact is with just extraneous parts that just don't need to be there. The dog can't even follow his own rules. He's bloodthirsty. He's bloodthirsty for human meat after after finally tasting it. But when he finally gets her alone and bleeding down her arm, he doesn't go for her and he runs away. The ghoulish figure, that would have been so much more intense if it was just in the mind. No, we get to see her. We get to see her there, and she she has to prove to him that she's better. No, she had to prove to herself. Extraneous. Beast of No Nation not being impactful, it is impactful. Whether whether you're not talking about the film, you're talking about its impact, which is the legitimacy of streaming films, which Beast of No Nation did, and there's a reason for it.
All right, and back to Tyler for 1 minute on the clock when you begin speaking.
To me, Gerald's game is as important to the development of Netflix as any other movie. It legitimized the streaming movie service idea of the original movies, while also, I mean, that movie has had a legacy of Netflix. Like I said, Mike Flanagan directed it, and this is where he honed his craft that we got to see later on in The Haunting of House Hill, The Haunting of Bly Manor. Like this became like a Netflix legacy, and beyond that, I mean, the movie was just the themes of trauma, vulnerability, the fear that we all have, trying to win the game. All of that has always been really impactful. I mean, I think for everybody, really. And with Beast of No Nation, I understand that it's a compelling film. Unfortunately, I was hoping that you would mention it more because I was going to refute it, but we were mostly focused on Gerald's game, which is, I mean, which it was really good. It was really impactful. Sorry, fine.
All good. That is time. All right, guys, solid first round. I'll go ahead and send you to the back while I bring in the judges. There is no fact checking because what kind of judge would I be if I was sitting on my phone looking up random things the whole time? That's kind of the bit at this point. I'd be an awful judge if I was doing that. So there is nothing to vamp this. I'm going to go straight to the judges. John, you were up first on this round. So I defer to you, sir. Who does your vote go to and why?
I think Tyler kind of mentioned it in his final speech. We did spend the entire time talking about Gerald's game, which to me means Beast of No Nation goes pretty much uncontested with no points against it. So I have to go with Will.
All right. Noah, I go down to you. Who gets your vote and what's sold?
I'm actually going to go the opposite direction. I'm giving my point to Tyler because Beast of No Nation was hardly mentioned, and I feel like Tyler was able to kind of counteract most of the points against Gerald's game. Also, as a side note, this is completely unrelated to my pick. Mike Flanagan is amazing, and because Tyler didn't mention it, Midnight Mass is amazing on Netflix, so go see it. Anyway, my point goes to Tyler. I promise there's no bias involved.
We can point out good things these guys did all day. I mean, Cary Fukunaga did True Detective, and I mean, Will's argued on the show that he hated it, but No Time to Die is pretty solid in my opinion. But with that said, yeah, this was an interesting one because it is, as Tyler said at the end there, Beast of No Nation wasn't brought up very much. But I would say that goes both ways. Tyler didn't have a lot of refute against it, but I feel like Will's positives of it very much stuck in one lane, which was it's an impactful film with a difficult story and a good message. And so for me, that really comes down to then, okay, if the bulk of the discussion was on Gerald's game, then what was said about Gerald's game? And for that, I think I do have to go with Tyler for this, because in terms of the discussion being about Gerald's game, everything that Will brought up, I do think Tyler refuted it very solidly and gave, even if Will disagrees, and again, that's obviously we're talking about interpretation, in terms of actual points given, he was able to refute and discuss everything that Will threw at him. And with his closing, he was able to argue the fact that in terms of Netflix, the movie's success was impactful in creating the partnership with Mike Flanagan, which rivals the success that Beasts of No Nation had, which it was never particularly said, but I'm aware that the impact that film had was leading to Netflix being an awards contender as well. So I would say that it rivals it in terms of what it did for the service. So it is an unfortunate thing that the round was one-sided in terms of film focus, but I think the refuting of the film did enough to give Tyler the point for me. But it was a very well done round. I'm going to go ahead. Thank you, judges. I will send you guys to the back, and I will bring back in the competitors, and we will go ahead and move on to question number 2, which is not in honor of anything's release, because the next film in this franchise is apparently never fucking coming out. Every time it gets delayed, it's like a year at a fucking time. So let's just ask this question. It is a franchise which by this point, most people would agree has more good entries than bad. But what is the worst Mission Impossible film? Let's see what the definitive answer is, because truthfully, there's not very many options to pick from. I would say the bulk of them have been very good. So maybe not shocking answers, but who can argue it better? With that said, though, Tyler, you are up first this time around, sir. So I'll go ahead and bring the timer in for you, drop myself to the back, and it will start when you begin speaking.
All right, so Mission Impossible. The series has been around for 25 years at this point. Has a lot of really great entries. But one entry that is the weakest, I mean, in terms of this question for sure, the worst has to be Mission Impossible 2. I know pretty much everybody I talk to collectively says that this one is the worst one. Really, this movie, it kind of doesn't really justify its existence. I mean, we get a bad guy who's pretty much just like they're trying to do the thing where it's like it's Ethan versus Ethan. He's going against someone who's literally body doubles as him, and it made it so that, I mean, this is a franchise that's always been really big on its bad guys. I mean, Philip Seymour Hoffman, John Voight, Solomon Lane. I always forget the guy's name, but those. It's always been the adversaries are always the parts that really stick out about Mission Impossible. And with Mission Impossible 2, I mean, Sean Ambrose, all we really know about him is that he's likes money and he is Ethan, but not Ethan.
And time. And that one, I believe I can fact check. I believe Solomon Lane is Sean Harris.
Okay, cool.
I believe that sounds correct in my head.
I don't know why I always forget.
With that said, though, all good. Will, over to you. As the guy who fact checks, I never grade based on facts. That just is what it is. Will, over to you, sir. Time starts when you begin speaking.
So the reason why the Mission Impossible films just kept getting better is because the stakes kept getting raised and raised and raised. Well, the big problem with Mission Impossible 1 is with the stakes on that film, they really legitimately could have been lower. With Mission Impossible 2, at the very least, that was the first time that we had the world-ending event, the big, the big cataclysmic. We have to stop the world, or else, we have to stop the bad guy from succeeding, or else the world dies. Well, in Mission Impossible 1, what happens if the bad guy succeeds? A bunch of spies get revealed. Well, what's that going to do? Also, any film that brings in Emilio Estevez out of his semi-retirement just to kill him 5 minutes later is automatically the dumbest film in the franchise.
And time. All right, Tyler, back over to you for 2 minutes, sir, when you begin speaking.
Yeah, I mean, Will's right. The stakes are low in Mission Impossible 1, but I think that kind of works for the movie. I mean, it's so easy now to say we've had so many entries and we've seen how gone. It's kind of like Fast and Furious. When it first started out, it used to be about stealing cars, and now they're going into space. Mission Impossible kind of follows that same trajectory. But I think with Mission Impossible 1, it has a really great story of who betrayed the team, trying to figure out who was the one that caused all those deaths, caused Emilio Estevez to die, which was tragic, and I did feel for that. But trying to figure that out, Ethan, on the run, which is something that we would see in almost every other movie. Him trying to figure out what exactly had happened, who does he trust, everything. I think that laid the groundwork for the franchise, and the stakes were small at the time, but it was still able to make a solid movie that was the springboard for the rest of it. Mission Impossible 2, I mean, it doesn't really add too much to anything. I mean, I don't really know of anything that it adds to the franchise as a whole. I mean, you have a virus storyline, which I think was just because of the product at the time. But you get really dumb decision making. Things like, Thandie Newton's character injecting herself with Chimera because she thought that was for the best, and then they have that's how you create like a fake time crunch, because you're like, okay, now we only have 20 hours to save her because she decided this was the best case of action, even though it probably wasn't the best case of action. Her telling Ambrose the entire plan because she thought he was Ethan, even though she definitely knew that Sean Ambrose was Ethan's double. So maybe she shouldn't always trust Ethan every time she sees him. She was just, I think, her addition. I mean, Thandie Newton is a great actor or a great actress, but she didn't really. This character was underserved her.
And time. All right, Will, back over to you. 2 minutes on the clock, sir.
While Mission Impossible 2 may not have been the best written of the franchise, at least I could follow the plot of the movie from point A to point B to point C. Mission Impossible is almost impossible to follow. They might as well just call it comprehension impossible, because half the times you just don't understand what's going on, and after a while you just don't care. He mentioned, that he felt sorry for Emilio Estevez's character dying at the beginning of the film. Well, the only reason why I cared is because it was Emilio Estevez. I don't know anything about his character. I don't know about anything about any of the characters that just unceremoniously die, and we're supposed to feel this tension. We're supposed to feel sorry for them. No. You have a great actor like Jon Voight, and you waste him. You have Tom Cruise at the top of his game, and he is just so hammy from 1 minute, and then the other half he is wooden. He just doesn't understand what he's trying to do, probably because he doesn't understand the plot of the movie either. At least with Mission Impossible 2, at least you can understand the decisions to a degree. Why wasn't he's saying that injecting herself with the serum wasn't a good idea? If she didn't inject it, it would have been in the hands of the bad guy, and it would have been in a terrorist's hands about a day and a half later, if that. So to get it out of his hands, she injected into herself, and that way they had a plan to get everything stopped, to get the cure to her so the world doesn't end. Those are stakes. Those are high stakes. And also, if you want to talk great performances in a cast, Anthony Hopkins as the head of IMF. even for the short period of time he's there, he adds such a gravity to the film you don't get in Mission Impossible 1. Mission Impossible 1 is just dead.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the 4-minute open discussion. The timer starts when the first competitor speaks.
I think something we need to... Oh.
Okay. So when everyone discusses Mission Impossible, what the worst one is, it's always easy to go with Mission Impossible 2 because at the time that was the lowest scoring. It was the one that followed up with Mission Impossible 1, and maybe it was an overcorrection in some regards to make it, make the stakes that much higher and focus on these grand action pieces. But when you're looking at such a convoluted plot of Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible, it is, pardon the pun, impossible not to think, well, at least I'm having fun with Mission Impossible 2. When they're on the motorbikes and they're doing when he's doing the gymnastics and the just absolute ass kicking with the knives and the hand to hand, all of those action pieces are just compelling to watch, and they're just fun to watch. It may not be the best, but it's still fun. With Mission Impossible, what do you get? Darklit rooms and people talking. It's not even fun verbal chess. It's just talking. It's like, why did this happen? And I swear to God, if you have a drinking game, for any time someone says knock list, your liver will collapse and kill itself. Who gives a fuck about the knock list? The knock list was such a horrible MacGuffin, which is why they've never tried anything like that in any of the other films, because it was just horrible.
I mean, yeah. As far as MacGuffins go, I don't think Mission Impossible has ever been one that's been the highlight. But I mean, as far as if we're talking set pieces go, I really don't know about any more tense moments that really were captured in 2, as was when they were trying to take a drink, the knock list. Krieger lowering Ethan, Luther, trying, work on the computer. Everything was so tense. I mean, they were trying to make sure that they didn't mess with the temperature, that there was no moisture, everything just to get this list. I mean, that was a really elaborate set piece that they did, that I think really spoke to.
If they would have, if that scene would have been maybe about at least 2 or 3 minutes shorter, I would have felt that tension. But they just stayed on it for so long, and they just threw just dumb elements in there. Oh my God, he's going to sweat. Okay, fine. That was clever. But then, there's a rat. So it's like, there's a rat. The rat's going to stir up dust. He's going to sneeze. It's like, okay.
I mean, these are all
we get the point. We get the point. Just move on. But no, they didn't. They're just like, first of all, had that scene not been in the trailer, that would have been great, because we wouldn't have been expecting it. But because it was just so heavily put in the trailer as, hey, I bet you want to know what's going on here, right? And then when I saw it, I'm like, I don't care. I just recently watched this for this, and I'm just like, there's no the tension is there for maybe the first 2 or 3 minutes of the scene, but they just go on and on and on. It's like, okay, we get it. Let's move on. Mm-hmm. Whereas at least with Mission Impossible 2, yeah, there's no hanging from the ceiling moment, except at the very beginning, which again was also in the trailer, but where he's free climbing that mountain in southern Utah. That's intense. And then him jumping and almost missing. Oh, that's intense. And with that, but at least with the music, you're having fun with it, and it's just so much more fun and enjoyable, intense. Whereas with Mission Impossible, it's fun for 2 minutes, and then it just drags and drags and drags, and just at some point just wish they would just move on.
All right, that will be time. We're going to go into the 1 minute closings. Tyler, you are up first with 1 minute on the clock when you begin speaking.
Okay, I'm gonna try to get through this really quickly. So, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why Mission Impossible 2 is worse than Mission Impossible. The story wasn't good. The villain wasn't good. They really didn't add anything. If you look at Mission Impossible set the framework for the franchise. It set the tense moments. It set pretty much everything that we're doing. It showed the most growth for Ethan. I mean, for quite a while until they introduced his wife to give him growth. But we got to see him really grow from being that hotshot, the hotshot agent to someone he'd gone through something with his team being eliminated and kind of going through that. I'd also introduce great characters like Luther, who's been in every single entry since then. I mean, Luther has always been his right hand. He's been the first person he's been able to trust after his team was killed. And he's as important to the franchise as Ethan is himself. And then John Renault, as Krieger and John Voight, both of those characters just brought a lot to their roles.
And time. All right, Will, back over to you for the final minute.
Yeah, Jean Reno and John Voight brought a lot to their roles. They brought heavy lifting of carrying the entire movie, which that's not great, and they didn't even do that great of a job of carrying that movie. The reason why they brought Luther back for all the other things is because he was the best thing about Mission Impossible. You're talking about a villain, you're talking about a villain played, and I'm going to forget his name, but the villain of Mission Impossible 2 is a former agent. He has a relationship with Ethan Hunt, and they go head to head, so they are equally matched. You don't have any equal matching in Mission Impossible. He says that there is growth in Ethan Hunt in the first one. Yeah, he goes from wooden acting to wooden acting with a furrowed brow. That's not much growth. At least you can see some kind of character development in Mission Impossible 2. Is it the best story? No, but it's still far easier to far easier to follow and much more fun.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and send the competitors to the back. I'll go ahead and bring the judges to the front. Again, that's another one off the head. The actor who portrayed the villain in Mission Impossible 2 is Dougray Scott. That is the name of the actor. You would be remiss to not remember him. Instead of potentially having a career-making role in the first X-Men film as Wolverine, he was instead contractually obligated to come back to reshoots for this. So we do have him to thank for Hugh Jackman. But with that said, Noah, I go to you first. Who gets your vote, and what was the main point that sold you?
I'm going to give it to Will on this one. He was really dominant in that 4-minute open debate round. But also, I just feel like he was able to counter a lot of Tyler's points, but also say that Tom Cruise's acting was really wooden and not really had a lot going on. It wasted actors like John Voight. It was pretty much just a bunch of talking in dark rooms and whatnot. Well, he's actually had good action set pieces and a good villain, even though it was same versus same. But yeah, that's pretty much why. So I'm going to go with Will on this one.
All right, John, down to you. Who gets your vote and what sold you?
I agree with Noah with the added piece that like Mission Impossible 1 is kind of the odd man out. Like the stakes have been raised since Mission Impossible 2, and it stays that way through 3 and Ghost Protocol and all the movies. It sets it apart in a way that actually does kind of make it tone-wise the worst movie. So I'd have to go with Will as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to go ahead and send you to the back and bring back in our competitors as we go ahead and move on to question number 3.
Oh.
All right, and we will go ahead and move on to question number 3 with the recent release of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which obviously, because we pre-record, is not out yet, but I imagine it's probably destroying the box office right about now. The MCU is continuing to be at the height of its fame and popularity, despite the fact that a lot of people would have called it quits probably after Avengers Endgame. They're still hanging in there, whether it be now their television series or their continuing slew of films. It seems like just the bullet train that will not stop moving, will not stop having successes. But when it comes to the MCU, the thing that we focus on is the quality of it. Now, there's a select few films, your Iron Man 2s, your Thor 2s, your Captain Marvel 1s, that people would say are on the lower end of that tier list in terms of quality. But what are the ones that people love that our competitors may not necessarily love? The question is, what is the most overrated film in the MCU? And Will, you are back up first on this one, sir. So we'll go ahead and throw it to you as the timer comes on screen. It will start ticking when you begin speaking.
As someone who absolutely loves Marvel, I really feel that Marvel right now is kind of in the throw something at the wall and let's see if it sticks phase of their oeuvre right now. And I chose a film that fits into that. And as much as I really hated writing this, I still wrote it down. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Now, overrated does not necessarily mean it's a bad movie. I am not saying that Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is necessarily a bad movie. What I'm saying is that this is an overrated film. This is a film that is loved, but probably loved way too much. They really tried to make a cultural event akin to Black Panther. They tried to, they tried to bring in an audience that is really underserved with Marvel, and I will congratulate them for at least attempting that. But then it just turned into another Marvel film, just with slightly more kung fu. And after a while, it just kind of blends together with the rest of Marvel instead of standing out.
And time. All right, Tyler, over to you for your opening minute.
Firstly, I feel like we're going to have a lot of the same statements because I was going to say also that I love Marvel, so it's hard to choose one of these films. But for me, I mean, there's so many great Marvel films out there, and it was a really difficult choice to choose which one I thought was overhyped. And I chose this one because something about it never sat right with me. And I know this is going to be really unpopular, but I chose Thor Ragnarok. With Ragnarok, I understand that it, did all these things for Thor, and it was a real fun time. But I think the real fun time hurt this movie more than people think. I mean, you can get through it really easy, quick and breezy, but at the end of the day, there isn't much depth to it. There isn't really anything. I mean, I remember every time any kind of sad scene came on, a joke was on it right after. And that never really sat with me because there was some really heavy things going on, things that Thor was experiencing. And I felt like we got more emotional catharsis out of his journey in Infinity War than we did in Ragnarok. And
time. All right, we're going to go back over to Will. 2 minutes on the clock, sir.
Thor Ragnarok absolutely is a great time, but when you take away all the glitz, when you strip the glitz, the glitter, and all the Jeff Goldblum, what you were left with is an emotional, hefty movie. You see him lose his father and have to deal with that. You think that you don't know whether he doesn't know whether he can trust his brother or not. He is now learning that he has a sister, and he might lose Ragnarok, or he might lose Asgard. He doesn't know whether he can be a king or not. And then all of a sudden, you have Bruce Banner and the Hulk and their dichotomy going on, and that alone is just amazing to watch them grow. Those two characters grow, as well as Thor, as well as Loki. With Shang-Chi, there is some emotional heft to this, but it gets bogged down and mired in a special effects fest and dragon fest. It just, the third act is extremely messy, and it really just does not serve the rest of the film well. And you can just kind of tell that they really didn't have any faith in a debut of this when they're bringing in Wong and the Abomination for comic relief all of a sudden. You're bringing in one of the worst MCU villains just for shits and giggles? Whoops. There goes again, this was being hyped as the big cultural event of Marvel. We had Black Panther as the big cultural event. for an underserved market in the African American community. So the Asian community is very underserved as well. So what did they do? They got one of their unknown villains. They redid one of their mistakes with the Mandarin, even bringing in Trevor Slattery in there just to kind of let him toy around. But the damage is already kind of done. This is a fun movie, but Thor Ragnarok is well worth its time, and it is so much better of a movie than Shang-Chi.
And time. All right, back over to Tyler. 2 minutes.
With Thor Ragnarok, I mean, you highlighted a lot of really intense things that happened. His dad dying, him losing Mjolnir. But every time that happens, there wasn't really. You say that he dealt with it, but I don't really see how he had a chance to deal with it. There was always another joke, or there was always another thing that was happening. He never really got to really think about it. I mean, I think the time that he really thought about his father passing away was when his sister was beating him up, and he saw him, and it made him realize he was the god of thunder, not the god of hammers. There's not really. I mean, there's a lot of like superficial emotional stuff that happens in this movie, and it never. I mean, we got things like Surtur, one of the biggest bad guys in Marvel, who was just really just kind of there as like a joke. I mean, it immediately becomes a joke when he destroys Asgard. It's not an emotional moment of like, oh my god, like we just lost our land. What are we gonna do? It was just like, I mean, Hulk tried to go fight him, and they're like, no, Hulk, don't do it, you child. And it really like, you just didn't really feel that much when Asgard was destroyed. I mean, and I know they're trying to go for like the whole people or Asgard thing, and I understand that, but like there's still supposed to be some weight to these battles and what's going on. I mean, that's something that we saw a lot in Shang-Chi. I mean, we got to see, I mean, the Mandarin, the familiar relationships in that were so well done. I mean, with the Mandarin, that character was so, I mean, he was complex. I don't know about the rest of you, but like for me, like for the Mandarin, I was like, okay, so this guy doesn't seem like he's truly the bad guy. It seems like he's in pain and he's in trauma and he misses his wife and he wants to save her. And we got to see like what kind of like that upbringing had impact on Shang-Chi and his sister and what that was like. And then how he ran away from that and kind of seeing his redemption before the end, where he finally embraces, who he is as a person. And as far as the CGI fights go, I mean, Ragnarok also had a giant CGI fight, so that's kind of just Marvel. That's not really.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the 4-minute open discussion. The timer starts when the first competitor speaks.
So you say that there's no emotional heft when Surtur is destroying Asgard, but if you look at the faces of everyone who's on that ship and watching all the ex-Asgardians just watching their homeland just burn, there is emotion to that really does hit home. And so that's just one of the many big points of Thor Ragnarok as to why why there is that emotional heft. Yes, there are some jokes, but this is just kind of what Taika Waititi does. He manages to temper things with humor. Like if you've ever seen Jojo Rabbit is a Holocaust film ostensibly, but but it's tempered with humor. And
right.
that's just what Taika Waititi does.
Take the edge away from a blade, it doesn't cut anything. I mean, it seemed like they leaned too far into the humor to the point where it costs the story, and so it just kind of boiled down these characters into we're gonna make jokes, and there's gonna be some stuff that's happening that's gonna be sad, and we may be sad about it, but don't worry, the jokes are gonna be coming. We're gonna continue. You're gonna get exactly what you want, which is gonna be a happy, fun time.
And you see, I just don't see where you're coming from on this, where why the jokes are hindering it at all. Because if you look at films like at Endgame, there's plenty of jokes surrounding Thor's mental state after essentially causing the snap to even happen. There's jokes surrounding that, but you can still feel the emotional weight. The headiness of that is still there. With Shang-Chi, you bring up, there's some emotional things in there, and you're right, there are, but that's where they just completely blink and you miss them. And not only that, the rest, there are events that essentially negate those emotional times. Like, oh, his sister, just wanted to be a family. Well, at the very end, what happens? Instead of mourning her father and wanting to be with her mother and be with her brother, she just takes up her father's business like that. That just completely negated all of the emotional weight and all the emotional heft from everything that happened in that film. Though I felt more strongly towards Aquafina's character and her wanting to belong in the family and her emotional journey than I ever did with any of the other characters. With Thor, at least, everyone gets an emotional journey. Hell, Carl Urban's character gets an emotional journey where he is just a joke henchman, and then finally he gets to be the hero at the end of the film, where he sacrifices himself. Loki gets an emotional journey where he gets to decide whether he's going to be the trickster or help be the savior for his people. Thor gets to figure out if he, gets to decide if he's going to lead or not, and ultimately goes with, well, I am now the leader, and this is what a leader does. All of those beats are just so amazing. And yes, there are some jokes that happen, but that does not take the edge of the blade at all.
When you talk about the journeys of Thor and Loki, I mean, those are the same repeat journeys that we see them go through every movie. I mean, in Thor, that's what we saw. In Thor 2, that's what we saw. In this one, this is what we saw. And I mean, I'm not trying to like pull in from like the other movies, but like literally, like Thor stops being the leader at later on. We just kept going through the same thing, trying to get more water out of this emotional well, and it got to the point where it's just like, okay, well, nothing is changing.
But everything does change at the very end when Ragnarok disappears. Nothing is absolutely changed at the end of Shang-Chi, though.
I mean, the characters are.
And time. All right, we're going to go ahead and get into the 1 minute closings. Will, you're up first with your final minute.
To address that last minute point, yes, all the characters are changed, but is it really for the better? And that's the big question that really hindered Shang-Chi and the Legend of Ten Rings. The big problem is that when Shang-Chi makes choices, they either completely negate them, or it turns out those are really the wrong choices. With Thor Ragnarok finally gave the absolute goofiness that from the comics, and that was already inherently there in both Thor 1 and Thor 2 the entire time, and just allowed it to play out. But the jokes do not hinder the movie at all. There is just tons of emotional and psychological beats there, and everyone's going on a personal journey of redemption, and it is just compelling and funny. Shang-Chi, there is some humor, there is some emotional beats, but it's still mired down by what it was trying to be rather than what it should have been. It should have been trying to be more of a family film, and it was just another Marvel 3-hour action film.
All right, and Tyler, over to you when you begin speaking.
Yeah, just to expand on my point at the very end, like he said, I mean, the Shang-Chi characters, they do come a long way from where they were at the beginning. I mean, with his sister, yeah, when we first met her, she was running a fight ring, and at the end, she's running her dad's organization. But that's really just to show, hey, we can try all we want to regain who we were, to try to reconnect to our family, and she reconnected to her family. But at the end of the day, we're defined by what we've gone through. And one of those things is that she never wanted to depend on anybody again. She wanted to be independent, and she wanted to be seen as someone who was powerful, someone who was a leader, and someone who's like they said in the film, girl boss. And so her taking over that organization made a lot of sense to me. As far as like the decision making of Thor Ragnarok, I mean, I don't know. It just seemed really contrived to destroy Asgard. I mean, I understand what they're trying to go there with it, but it just didn't really stick with me.
And time.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Another really solid round. I'm going to go ahead and send you guys to the back as I go ahead and bring the judges forward. And I will go to John first. Who gets your vote, and what was the main selling point?
I would say on this one, I am going to, again, kind of the opposite way I'd said in the first question. I'm going to go with Tyler just because with the way the 4 minutes went out, with the notes that were given prior in the debate, the focus was heavily put on Thor Ragnarok just because Will was talking about it so much. So we did hear a lot about Thor Ragnarok, and really, I think the hits on Thor Ragnarok were not as hearty as they could have been. So I'm going to go with Tyler.
All right, so the first vote goes to Tyler. Noah, down to you. Who gets your vote, and what sold you?
I am also going to Tyler to save suspense. I feel like Will made a fatal mistake here by saying that Thor was emotional, because Tyler made the point that those emotional beats were kind of downplayed by the humor pretty much right after. And so Will saying that the film was emotional supported that fact, but also Tyler is saying, yeah, the humor downplayed that. So it's trying to be a comedy when it's having these emotional beats and downplaying everything that's happening. And I had some other notes written, but that's the major thing that happened. And that pretty much made my mind up. And just Tyler was able to continuously support that ideal that the emotion was downplayed by humor. So Tyler.
All right, so the second point does go to Tyler there, guys. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and send you to the back as we bring in the competitors and move on to question number 4. As Tyler or Will there is joined by some support, I will allow it. You can use her or him for as much aid as you need in this 4th round. Tyler, if you have any friends, you can grab them as well. We'll go ahead and move on to the 4th question, and we're going to stick within the realm of talking about things related to Marvel, because with the release of Doctor Strange last week, it wasn't just a return for Marvel, it was a return for somebody else, as director Sam Raimi released his first film in 9 years. The last movie he had that was released was the 2013 film Oz the Great and Powerful. He returns as the director of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and Sam Raimi is a director who, when you look back on his career, he does have a number of great films. However, and I'm only going to bring these up because none of these films are answers. I think Raimi is somebody whose career, in terms of his legacy, has kind of been downplayed because people think Oz the Great and Powerful is mixed. Spider-Man 3, pretty mixed. And the one in between them, Drag Me to Hell, unfortunately wasn't as big a success or as long-standing a film as people would have probably wanted from him, as much as it is a good film. And so I think that has hurt the legacy of Raimi a little bit. So let's boost it up here in honor of his most recent release. The question is, what is the best Sam Raimi film? And we are going to go, Tyler, you are up first on this one. So I will go ahead and bring the timer back up for you, and it will start ticking once you begin speaking, sir.
So I'm going to get this out of the way right now. I know a lot of people are probably thinking Spider-Man 2 is the best one. But for me, I wanted to go with the most Sam Raimi film for the best Sam Raimi film. And that choice has to be Army of Darkness. Army of Darkness is the 3rd film in the Evil Dead franchise, the franchise that launched his career and Bruce Campbell's career. I mean, it was the movie that when you watch it, it's the movie that like, this is his love. Like, this is the thing he's always wanted to make all his life. I mean, it's crazy. It takes place in the Middle Ages. It's got great practical effects, which has always been his jam. The story is just always a lot of fun. It's just a rambunctious movie that you can just tell that he has a lot of fun with it. Bruce Campbell has a lot of fun of it. They just get to, I mean, the Evil Dead franchise just kind of goes off the rails, which, I mean, I guess it wasn't really on the rails before. But you could just tell that this is the movie that he always wanted to make, and it just shines. I mean, it shines in its ridiculousness, and it shines in its Evil Deadness.
And time. All right, Will, over to you. 1 minute opening when you start speaking.
So a lot of people probably would have expected, well, if he didn't choose Spider-Man 2, then I must choose Spider-Man 2. Well, I did not. I decided to go with a simple plan. While Sam Raimi is, known for being rambunctious and over the top and just making sure that everything cranks to 11, when at the end of the day, Sam Raimi actually is a much better filmmaker than most people give him credit for, and a simple plan illustrated that to a T. It showed his great atmospheric work. It showed that he can get the best performances out of his actors. And while the Evil Dead franchise gave Bruce Campbell his career, with a simple plan, you have Billy Bob Thornton, you have Gary Cole, you have Bill Paxton, and you have Bridget Wilson. You have supremely great actors, and they are giving them all, and it's all thanks to Sam Raimi's just amazing direction. And this is just the absolute best Sam Raimi.
Time. All right, so not a Spider-Man film versus not a Spider-Man film. That's just what the real hardcore geek film fans out there are saying. But it is Army of Darkness versus A Simple Plan. Tyler, you have 2 minutes on the clock when you begin speaking.
Yeah, I think with Army of Darkness, we really get to see how Sam Raimi has evolved. I mean, this takes place 11 years after the first one came out. There was a sequel that was also a reboot. In this one, I mean, we get to really see how he's evolved. I mean, we get to see kind of like the mania, the story. I mean, this is the trilogy capper. This is where he wants to finish his story until after the Evil Dead comes out, but we're not going to talk about that right now. But we get to see things like, in the second movie, we get to see Ash fight his hand, because his hand gets taken over and he cuts it off. That's how he gets the iconic chainsaw hand. In this one, we get to see that taken kind of a step further, like Will said, cranked to an 11, where he actually becomes like the main bad guy that goes against him is himself. Like it's it's a clone of himself. It's a Deadite version. And so we get to kind of see him fight someone who thinks, exactly like he does, who thinks as wacky as he does, who thinks, who's as weird and dumb as he is. And so we get to kind of see like, we get to see that goofiness. We get to see that originality. We get to see, I mean, after he kills his Deadite version, or he thinks he killed his Deadite version, we get one of the best costume designs I think I've seen from Sam Raimi, in the Deadite Ash. The skull cap, the fact that he has to wear a strap to keep his jaw in place, things like that really stick with me. And the fact that Ash accidentally causes all this because he misreads a word because he forgets it. It's probably the most Ash thing I've ever seen. So the story, as nonsensical as it is, still makes sense in the terms of the Evil Dead franchise. And so I think he brought a lot about to this. And as far as the Simple Plan goes, I didn't know it existed before we did this. So I don't know if that means it's the best Sam Raimi film.
And time. All right, Will, back over to you. 2 minutes on the clock.
Just because you haven't heard of it does not mean it is disqualified for the best. I'm going to get that one out of the way first. With Evil Dead 2, which is arguably and ostensibly considered the best Evil Dead movie, things are already cranked up to 11. So if things are already cranked up to 11, eventually things have to come back down, right? Well, apparently that wasn't Sam Raimi's plan for Army of Darkness. Well, after a while, it just becomes noise, and that's what Army of Darkness is. Yeah, it's amping up the silliness. They're answering questions. They're finally answering questions that really weren't answered. It's like, where did this book come from? I didn't really care, but I got the answer to it anyways. At least with Simple Plan, you have an earnest movie. You have all the silliness stripped away, and you can finally see what Sam Raimi's good at. Good atmospheric suspense. This is something that was forgotten about with the first Evil Dead, where Evil Dead was a suspenseful film. Evil Dead 2, even for all its just over-the-top silliness, still had suspense. Army of Darkness completely abandoned that, and just forgot how, just decided to be as silly as humanly possible. That doesn't work. And to quote Dark Phoenix, or quote X-Men Apocalypse, the third movie is always the worst, and Army of Darkness absolutely is. A simple plan has, not only the best suspense of any Sam Raimi movie, but it has the most relatable plot. What happens if you find what happens if you find $4 million lying in the woods? What happens? What'll happen to your friends? Who can keep the secret? And the suspense that goes back and forth about what's going to happen next. That is intense. That is relatable for these people who are just down on their luck. And it is just an incredible movie overall.
All right, we're going to go into the 4-minute open discussion. The timer will start when the first competitor speaks.
So to elaborate, because Tyler said that he didn't realize that this is a film. So I'm going to expand on a couple of points here. First, you have these people who are milling about in a low income life, and they think they're okay until they make a random discovery of this downed plane and all of this money. Well, they decide to take the money and see what happens if anyone comes looking for it, if anyone's going to try and claim it, or if they can just spend the money amongst themselves. That alone, that what would you do scenario is intense, and that just is great filmmaking in the hands of someone who knows how to do great suspense, and that's Sam Raimi.
Okay, first thing, I didn't mean to make it seem like because I haven't heard of a movie doesn't mean that it's not a good movie. I'm not someone who thinks like that. I just wanted to say, I didn't know that it existed. After learning about it, I will say that I don't see how it could be the best. It's such a regular plot. I mean, finding money that doesn't belong to you, and then taking that money because it's going to help you and it's going to save your life, marriage, pay for your kids, whatever, is a plot we've seen a lot in movies and TV shows, and nothing about this really told me that this was an exception to that story, that this was going to be something that, it's a familiar story, but there's going to be something about it that's, going to change the game, or it's going to leave a different impact on you than all the other stories do.
Well, if you're going to make that argument, then I've already seen Army of Darkness done before, done better with Monty Python, the Holy Grail. Just absolute silliness told in medieval times and overly graphic. Except that movie had great comedic timing. That movie had great jokes. It wasn't just gore, 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 shout, 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 boom, 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 which is what Army of Darkness was trying to do. It was trying to, for some reason, attempt to up the silliness of Evil Dead 2, but Evil Dead 2 was already at the pinnacle of what it should have done, and really should have just capped at there. But no, they decided to make a third entry and decided to try and make this little silly thing, which doesn't further the plot. It doesn't show anything different aside from Ash fighting himself, which, as you've already argued against before, like versus like isn't that much fun. And this is like versus like, just like this is Spy versus Spy, but really dumb. This is dumber than Spy versus Spy, which I don't like that. Saying the simple plan can't be the best because we've seen that kind of plot before, I feel is really unfair, just because after a certain period of time, sometimes we are going to see plots recycled throughout time. But the reason why this one hits home, especially in a time like this right now, where there's just so many people who are down on their luck, who are looking for some kind of answer. Well, they stumble upon an answer and wonder if that is truly the answer, or if they should have just left well enough alone in the first place. That is intense, and especially when you're giving it to Sam Raimi, who gives great, allows Billy Bob Thornton and Bill Paxton and Bridget Wilson to give these wonderful performances and the Sam Raimi atmosphere all to it. Oh, and not to mention Danny Elfman's just wonderful, wonderful score to underscore everything. No, this is absolutely Sam Raimi at his best.
Okay, I mean, you've said like a lot. You said a lot of names. I'm just curious about what about the plot is different. What about the plot really sticks with you beyond just these names that he has that he's directing?
And time. A question was posed, but we'll have to wait a minute to hear it. Tyler, you're up first. You can begin speaking, and the timer will start when you do.
Sorry for posing that and then saying and then speaking. That's not that wasn't cool. But no. So yeah, Army of Darkness, I believe, is Sam Raimi's best film because it exemplifies everything that Raimi loves about filmmaking, and it's everything that people love about Raimi. The great practical effects, the zany hijinks. I mean, that is peak Raimi. Everything about that movie. I mean, and also, you know, the story does have more depth to it than I think that we talked about because if we really think about it, Ash is a character that he's self-loathing. He's he's always trying to hide all these feelings, and so having to kill him, like just having to kill himself, is something that was like a lot that he had to deal with. And I mean, we see that later on in the TV show how he has to deal with the fact that like how he feels about himself. And I think this is kind of the beginning. This is kind of where we get to see a little bit more about Ash. You know, it's not an Ash that's always on the run, an Ash that gets to step up and say, "Hey, this is like I'm the hero. I'm the one that's going to take this down." When we get to kind of see him fully unleashed, if that makes sense.
And time. All right, Will, back over to you. Final minute on the clock, sir.
If Ash is self-loathing and you're basing it from the TV show, that needs to be stricken from the record because the TV show has nothing to do with this trilogy aside from name only and name and character only. In Army of Darkness, just like in Army of Darkness, he is not self-loathing. He is very, very arrogant. He is very, very misogynistic. So if that's the character we're supposed to be rooting for at the end of the film, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. To answer your question, what makes this so what makes these characters so great? In Simple Plan, because they are just doing their best. They're just trying from day to day. These are people who are living paycheck to paycheck. That is something that we are seeing this very in these modern times where people are just struggling and yet they're just trying to make by and they're just trying to be happy, and then they're they're thrust into this situation and everything just kind of spirals out of control. Sam Raimi knows how to take take a bad situation and spiral it, and that is wonderful.
And time.
Plan.
All right, guys, another great round. I'm going to go ahead and sit you guys in the back as I bring the judges forward, and we'll go ahead and get to it. Noah, you are up first, sir. Who gets your vote, and what was the main selling point?
Will's going to get it for me this time just because I feel like he was able to really bring forward his film a lot and also refute points that Tyler made, but also just kind of glorify his film a lot more. So,
all right, John, down to you. Who gets your vote, and what was the main selling point?
I have so much to say about this topic, but I will cut myself off. The fact that Will chose A Simple Plan and defended it is miraculous in the face of like what Sam Raimi is. So I have to give him the point.
All right.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and sit you in the back, but your job is not quite done yet because we have had a hell of a match thus far, and we will be moving into the blind round because of it. In case this is somehow your first Movie Battleground match, welcome. Glad you could join us 70-something matches in. But if you need a thing of what the blind round is, I will give it to you. In the blind round, the question is something that is unrelated to anything the competitors may notify. You guys know, everyone knows that two strengths are a part of the match. Other questions are selected because of their relevance to any kind of scenario. These are completely random picked questions that they have no sort of frame of mind or reference for. There's another element to the blind round, though. The way that it works is I will give them a generalization of a question. My longstanding example has been name me a Will Smith movie. So you will then name me a Will Smith film. Then I will give you the actual proper question you will have to debate. Excuse me. I'll give you the question that you have to debate. Whether or not you feel that your answer 100% fits the question, you will have to do your best to argue it. While you have not had the extreme amount of time to prepare as you had before, I will give you a few minutes off screen to prepare. Once you are done, we will come back. We will debate. The rules are the same from there on. Is there any questions, guys, or are we ready to go?
I think I'm ready.
All right. With that said, best of luck, guys. Your blind round prompt is... Oh, and as a reminder, for whoever speaks first, answers first, you will go first, just so you guys know that answers that question there. All right. The prompt is, name me an action film from the 2010s. And just to put it out there for the audience, when I say action film, it can be something that is genre bending as well. As long as it meets the qualification of being an action film, it is acceptable. And you guys can obviously have a minute on this since, there's a million options.
Can I do a quick Google to make sure that this action film's from the 2010s?
Yeah, you can look up. That's fine.
Okay. Okay, cool.
I can't get this film out of my head, so I'm just going to say it and hope for the best.
Sure.
Looper. Because I think that was 2012.
Thank you.
It was 2012.
I'm going to go with The Expendables.
The Expendables.
Which was 2010, so just barely made it.
It is, yes. All right, so we have Looper versus The Expendables. The question is, what is the worst action film of the 2010s? So at this point, we are going to go off screen. For you watching at home, it'll only be a matter of 20 seconds of elevator music, but for these guys, they will get a couple of minutes to put their arguments together, and we will be back with the blind round of this movie Battleground match. All right, and we are back, ladies and gentlemen, and we are ready to go ahead and get into this game-deciding blind round. As a reminder for the people who have short-term memory loss and thus can't remember what was said 20 seconds ago, the prompt was to give me an action film from the 2010s, as I said audibly. Very broad definition, just because, if something has action in it, it's an action film. Cool with me. It is what it is. The question is, what is the worst action film of the 2010s? We do have Looper on the board. We do have Expendables on the board. Will, you are up first with Looper, as you did answer first. I will go ahead and bring the timer back in for you, sir, and it will begin ticking when you speak. Guys, you both done an excellent job tonight to reach this point, so I do wish you the best of luck in this blind round. It will begin when you start speaking, Will.
Rian Johnson does three things really well. He does comedy well, he does atmospheric well, and he does drama and suspense well. None of which are featured in Looper. Looper is a time travel movie that doesn't follow time travel rules. It is an action movie that barely has any action in it. So if you're looking for a film where people are talking about, time travel and what it's like to time travel, I mean, if you need that, then safety is not guaranteed is just out there too. But with Looper, you expected big action with Bruce Willis in there, and he's relegated to a verbal chess partner, and that's just not fun for anybody.
And time. All right, we go back over to Tyler. 1 minute on the clock for you.
All right, so The Expendables is a high-octane film filled to the brim with actors who don't really belong in the landscape of the world of the acting today. It's Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Dolph Lundgren, all these people that were really big in the the 80s, 90s, coming together to kind of say, hey, all this stuff that you thought was cool then, it's cool now still, right? It's it's cool beating up people and doing all kinds of really really high octane stuff and naming our characters yin yang and all that stuff. That's still cool, right? It's not cool. It makes for a pretty bad film when you watch it and you feel like you've seen something that isn't how we as a society reflects today. Um, and so it doesn't really have much place in today's world. In the 80s it was cool, but today it just kind of makes you cringe.
And time. All right, Will, back over to you, sir. 2 minutes on the clock.
If you're going to say something is the worst action film of the 2010s, immediately throwing out the phrase high octane is probably not the best way to go about your argument. Second of all, if you're seeing Expendables for the plot, what are you also doing? Watching porn for the plot? No, you're not. You're watching action for very specific things. You're watching action for explosions, for fights, and often you're watching it for the people he mentioned: Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then who else do you have in there? You have Wesley Snipes. You have Dolph Lundgren. These are the pinnacle of action stars. So of course they're going to be in the Expendables, and of course they're going to be in this film. Oh, well, the film was poorly written. Guess who wrote it? Sylvester Stallone. So is this the best action film of 2020, the 2010s? Of course not. But it's far from the worst. Looper, on the other hand, claims it's an action film. It claims it's an action film. And it's just talking most of the time. Yeah, there's a couple set pieces here and there where there's some action, including the end, but the big climactic scene that we're all waiting for, what happens? It's over in 5 minutes. The entire film, for the entire almost 2-hour runtime, if not over 2-hour runtime, is over in the blink of an eye. It does Bruce Willis, one of the just absolute pinnacles of action. It does him dirty. Joseph Gordon-Levitt's action career was killed. Was just pretty much killed right on soon as this film came out. There's nothing, there's some interesting concepts. There's some interesting dialogue, but but to call this an action film is a complete slight against action films. It is a slap in the face to action films. At least Expendables was exactly what you signed up for: action, high octane, and a lot of fun.
All right, so just a couple, because I can do this off the top of my head, just a couple quick fact check. All the cast members named so far for the first Expendables film have been accurate, except for Wesley Snipes. He was only a part of the third film. But with that said, everyone else has been pretty accurate so far. Tyler, back over to you for 1 minute or 2 minutes on the clock.
It's worst is always going to come down to what that person thinks the worst is. You can say it's a lack of action. You could say it's a movie that shows that a movie of actors who don't really fit into, they still bring the action, but when you watch it, you're like, what is this doing to me as a person? And for me, that's why The Expendables is worse, is because when I watch it, I see a lot of the actions, I see a lot of the behavior that I don't feel like should be heralded as this is the way that someone's supposed to be anymore. It just doesn't have a place in a world where we're trying not to do things like reduce Asian characters into naming them yin yang and then having them just pretty much be characters of what an Asian person is, and he's really good at martial arts, doing things like that. Things like that, like having the Russian guy be the bad guy. Things like that. It's stuff that it worked at the time, but it doesn't work now, and we can try to ignore that as much as we want. But at the end of the day, that always sticks out to me more than the action does. It sticks out to me more as like, is this something that I should be watching? Is this something that's shaping me currently? And is this something I want to continue to let shaping me? With Looper, it raises a lot of really interesting points about, hey, what do you, when it comes down to it, are you willing to do the job, or are you willing to, or are you going to try to save yourself? He has to essentially, I don't like saying it, but like he essentially has to kill himself. He has to kill his older self, and his older self has a plan of his own and leads to this big cat and mouse game. And it's like he has to decide: am I going to kill myself so that way I can live today, or am I going to let myself live so that way I can live for the better in the future? And I think that's a really interesting question that's couched in this.
And time. All right, we're going to go into the 4-minute open discussion. The timer will start when the first competitor speaks.
Yeah, it's a cat and mouse game. It's a cat and mouse game that's done through 90% dialogue and almost no action. It's like a cat and mouse game is supposed to be suspenseful, and there's no suspense here. So that's a problem. And if you want to talk about, oh, well, I don't like Asian stereotypes, look what they do in Looper. There's tons of Asian stereotypes. There's tons of all sorts of other stereotypes in there. It's pretty bad when it comes to stereotyping Asian people. So if that's what you're basing your argument with why Expendables is bad, well, my film does it, but at least with Expendables, you're still getting what you signed up for. You're still getting an action film. You're still getting action stars, whether or not they are good actors, whether or not they're stereotypes of different things. Okay. That's not the discussion we're talking about. We're talking about the film overall, and calling it the worst action film when you're still getting all the points of an action film, that's hard to argue.
You say that about the Asian stereotypes, caricatures of Looper, but that I don't recall seeing that in Looper. So I don't know if that's
is what
or not.
There's an entire plot with the Asian mob.
Okay. Then maybe so. I don't know. I can't speak to that, but I remember there being a lot more action set pieces than you've been saying. With the whole subplot of telekinesis and having powers. There's
which is used once.
There's always fight. He's fighting for his life throughout that entire movie. He has to fight against his older self as well as his employers because
there's two, but there's only two sequences, and one of those set pieces and one of those things are actually blended in one sequence where he's fighting against his older self and he's fighting against his employers. That's all one set piece. So really there's only 3 big action sequences. All of them are done in the blink of an eye. Whereas at least with the Expendables, you have multiple big action sequences, all of them lasting, a lot longer than the 1 to 2 minutes you get in Looper. And so therefore the action in Expendables is far more satisfying than it is in Looper. Looper is nothing but dialogue and some, little tricks, levitating coins and stuff like that. That's all you get. You hardly get any action, and it's not thrilling at all.
Sorry, trying to pull some stuff. Looper may be a little bit smarter. It doesn't have to distract you with the giant set pieces. It doesn't have to distract you with the giant explosions. It's not, but you're going there for a different kind of action film. And I think that film, it raises a lot more questions. It makes you think a little bit more. It doesn't solely hinge on the fact like there's going to be explosions. It's not a Michael Bay film where there's just going to be a lot of things going on. It's going to get your adrenaline pumping, and then by the movie's just going to end.
The entire time I'm watching Looper,